Hey guys, so let's have a chat around the final coat for your paint jobs for your bodies. So this is really where your hard work for preparation and priming and that stuff really comes into effect, and you'll start to see that your paint jobs will really start to shine and sing out. So there's a couple of things you need to consider. And we'll get into that now. First of all is picking your paint. So we've got a few paint types you can choose from here. Is obviously there's the lacquers, there's the enamels, and believe it or not, there's also nail polish as well, which I've started to use quite a bit. And that's essentially, a lot of nail polish is actually just acrylic lacquers, believe it or not, but you just need a hardening agent to go with it as well. I won't get too much into those at the moment. I use nail polish mainly for those hard to find or really rich, vibrant day glow colours that you just can't get in traditional lacquers. But if we take a step back, the kind of lacquers that I use, and they're very, very good, is these guys. I strongly recommend Tamiya LP lacquers, and that's for the top coats and even for the clear coats as well. If you're going for clear coats, their LP9 lacquer is very, very good, extremely forgiving, and if you get it right, you will get a very nice mirror finish when you're done. Other brands out there like Mr. Hobby, Gunzi, and that kind of stuff are also extremely good as well. I mainly choose Tamiya because it's readily available at my local hobby shop. Otherwise, I'll be using other brands as well. But yeah. And when you usually find something that you like and work with it a lot, that you usually stay with it. And the problem with the Tamiya lacquers is that the color range is not the best. So quite often you can do your own color mixes and that stuff. So if you're getting into color tints, you'll see some of my cars. If you followed some of my builds on my photo album, you'll see things like the Leighton House cars, which I've done. They were specific tints that I've had to mix out of various colors and stuff. So it's worthwhile, if you're getting to those kind of custom mix, to get yourself a color wheel and use the color wheel to sort of work out what the base color is, you know, for a purple, or like on those Leighton House cars, very similar to a turquoise, but it's not actually a turquoise, it's more like a Miami blue. And then you can work out the colors that go towards making those kind of colors up. And then get your eye sort of tuned as well to getting those tints. So the way I approach the colors is basically more around the color first, and what kind of color do I want to get, and then from there, if your priming's right, if your base primer's right, like specifically if you're doing a Ferrari and that stuff, you want that pink primer to bring it that real rich red. Then you work on these. Okay, then thinners. Now the thinner that I use is that's when I'll change my thinner too. So if you were using the traditional just general hardware store, like from Mitre 10 or Bunnings and that kind of stuff, the Digger thinner, I would then start to consider changing the thinner type to something like with a retardant in it, that kind of thinner from Tamiya. There are other brands out there as well. I use this because it's readily available just down the road, and that's because the retardant will slow the drying time down, because you don't want that orange peel, because you can deal with the orange peel, but it's just more work for you, right? And it adds more risk to your cleaning up as well. So the retardant will slow the drying time down, allow the paint to level out. If you don't use the retardant, and depending on how your weather conditions are at the time, if it's really hot, less of a problem, but if it's quite cold, if you're spraying in the winter time, then you have higher risk of orange peel and that kind of stuff as well, which is harder to get rid of. And so I use that. I save this stuff because it's not cheap. I save this stuff mainly for the top coats, as well as doing clear coats over decals as well, because I do find this stuff is not as aggressive on the decals, specifically if you're using aftermarket decals like Indicals. I'm a big fan of Indical decals, specifically for my Formula 1 cars. That the normal thinners that you'd get from a hardware store can be quite harsh on them, and you won't notice the damage it's doing to your decals till about 3 months later. Like I've had some decals that were originally done with like these traditional hardware store thinners. They goes on fine, it looks really great finish and that stuff, and about 3 months later you notice your decals are starting to crack as everything's starting to gas out. That's where I find this stuff, for some reason, it works really well. Now I actually talked to the Indicals guys, and that's what they say they use this thinner. So I try and use it for everything now. So with that combination, if for a Tamiya clear and say Tamiya lacquer, you can get those kind of finishes, right? But that's pretty much a mirror finish there. Hopefully the camera will show you. and that was over top of the decals as well. So that's clear coat over the decals, right? That's on a Lotus 91. With not a lot of cleanup, by the way, as well. That's what I would use, and that's the approach to take. And the ratio for thinning out is really depending on your airbrush as well. So like this airbrush here, my trusty clear coat airbrush, I usually, and it's got a very fine needle on it, so I would use, say, something like a 60-40 ratio, maybe 70-30 of thinner to clear. Sounds quite high, but because it's very thin, you need to thin it right out. Sorry, because the needle's very fine. If I'm going with a slightly heavier needle, like in my Badger Matrix, this one here, I can get away with, say, maybe a 60-40 or 50-50 ratio of thinners. And that's quite important, because when you do it enough times, you'll get to tell by the sound of the airbrush whether you've actually got the mixture right, because it should sound really like a sound, and you know you've got the mixture just right. If you start here, it's starting to choke a bit, and instead of, you know, it's probably not quite right, and the thinners, you just need to top it up a little bit more thinner. So whenever you're doing your top coat, of course, test it on a body or piece of plastic just to make sure it's fine, and then go for it. The spraying technique is pretty much the same as you do for your primer. Do the side bits first, and all the stuff which is hard to get hold of, and then you can go over it. And I usually do about 2 or 3 coats, so maybe light coats first. When I mean light coats, I would start off with a mist coat, just enough to give it a base for the top, the heavier coats to bind to. And that's also a good way to test too, when you're going over to the top of decals with a clear coat, to see whether the clear is actually causing any damage to the decals as well. So when you do that, it's just, you know, real light coat, just give it a few minutes to settle down and just see how it's sitting, and then you come back and you go, okay, slightly heavier, okay, that looks good, and heavy again, and then I just blast it with a really heavy coat to the point where it almost runs. That's just the way I do it. And if you start to see some runs, because you got it on a nice stand, you can start just to move it around like that for about a few minutes, because when you're moving it around, of course, it's got nowhere to run because gravity's not working against you. And eventually it'll level out. These Tamiya, or most lacquers, actually do kind of evaporate. I kind of call it the Glad wrap effect, because it sort of just soaks in it. As the thinners start to evaporate, they just sort of level out. So quite often you can get away with, don't stress about the runs, as long as it's not too bad, and you can just keep doing this, and within a few minutes it'll level out. I'm quite fortunate here where I am. It's very dust free, so I don't have to worry about using. I've got a spray booth here, and it looks grubby, but it's a lot of just overspray. I use this for most of my spray jobs, but quite often I'm just holding it here up and down, you know, just until it levels out, and then I just put it on a vise on a stand just to hold it once it's dry, or touch dry, just to harden over a few days. And then once I've got it really hard, then I'll put the clear coat on. If you're going to be doing decals first, of course, do the decals and then you clear coat. On some cases, I've done a clear coat before the decals, like that Britain motorbike I just finished in my build library. That was done because I wasn't sure how the acrylic lacquer nail polish was going to handle the clear coat. I did a clear coat first, because I didn't want to waste the decals, because they are really nice decals. And then, okay, it looks good. Then I went for another clear coat over top of the decals again after I applied them, and that worked really well. So hopefully that'll help you guys, give you some guidance for that. Feel free to fire any questions away. You can use gloss, you can use matte within the clear coat over top, and it doesn't really matter. The only thing I found though, just before I finish, is that if you're going to go decals over top of a matte base, sometimes the decals might silver around the outside, not all the time, but sometimes, depending on the decals. Like Indicals are usually fine. I've done that plenty of times. If you catch my build library of the Lotus 49s I've done, and I've done a few of them now for people, that was done on a flat British racing green, and then I clear coated over top of that, and you'll see the finish is absolutely fine. But it really depends on the decals as well. And you can go clear coat over top of gloss paint as well, so that's not a problem. So yeah, best thing to do if you're not sure, try it out on a test body or a test part somewhere, and just to make sure, and then you're away. So my next video, I'm going to talk about polishing, and that's where things really start to shine and you get that kind of finish on your parts as well. So yeah, hopefully that was useful, and we'll talk soon.